Deaths in the desert along the U.S.-Mexico border.
We go out there and we train for these situations, so we're ready to respond at a moment's notice.
Hoping and waiting, the son of a missing migrant.
He told me it was going to be a 6-day walk, so I waited the 6 days, and from there I just started calling him and he wouldn't pick up.
Plus, a nationwide effort is launched in Tucson. This is Arizona Week. Hello, and thanks for joining us. Every year, undocumented immigrants die crossing through Arizona's desert. This year is no different. Pima County handles the bulk of deceased migrant cases in Arizona. Here's Arizona Public Media's Nancy Montoya with Pima County Medical Examiner Dr. Greg Hess.
We've found 69 remains of people that we believe to be foreign nationals that we found in the desert that we would term undocumented border crossers so far in calendar year 2016.
Is that up or down from previous years?
That's about 10 remains ahead of where we were in 2015. In terms of years previous to 2015, it's just kind of waxed and waned over time since about the year 2000, so it's been going on for about 16 years now. And as I said, the numbers per year will go up and down a little bit. In 2002, we had 146, and our busiest year was in 2010, where we had 223. And in 2015, we had a total of 138. And as I said, in 2016, we've had 69 so far, and we're about 10 ahead of the pace that we had in 2015. So it continues to be a problem for us.
And one would imagine that the hotter it is, the more dangerous it is out there, and so your numbers go up during the summertime?
Every year in the summertime, we tend to get more remains that are recovered. In June of this year, we had 24 remains that were found. So far in July, we've had 14.
Our harsh desert conditions, that makes your job more difficult, doesn't it?
Well, when people die, they'll start to decompose, and that process can be slowed down with refrigeration, and it basically speeds up the warmer the environment is. So if someone dies outside in the desert in the summertime and it's very hot and their remains are not protected from insect and animal activity and the weather, essentially you can become skeletal remains or nearly skeletal remains in a very short period of time, maybe 2-3 weeks. And when you have remains that have that amount of decomposition, it does make it harder to identify who they are. You may not be able to immediately tell if it's a man or woman, or how much they weighed, or how tall they are, or if they had any identifying marks or scars or tattoos, what they looked like, how old they are. The chance of them having property that may be identifying goes down as they decompose and the remains are scattered by animals and the weather, as I described. So that, yes, that's a contributing factor for us.
I know you're a scientist. You're somebody who deals with facts. Do you think of the human person, or when they come in here, are they remains? Do you have to kind of remain distant from the individual as a human being and look at it more as the facts coming in? How do you handle that?
Well, everyone here, this is what we do, essentially day in and day out. So we have to be professional about it and objective, and examine the remains with the intent to do what we're supposed to do. Again, certify the cause and manner of death, identify who they are, and get those remains back to their family members. So that's our day-to-day, and that's our process. So we don't necessarily have a lot of time to think about more the human side and some of the backstories. It's the work that we have to put in to try to make those things happen.
But the human side is pretty important, you would agree, and that's why organizations like Humane Borders and Colibre come in, and they handle the emotional side, don't they?
Yeah, they help us a lot with different aspects of this issue. Colibre helps us with the missing persons side. So we find remains, but we need to deal with family members and collect missing persons reports, and they assist us with doing that. And Humane Borders is interested in water and preventing deaths from occurring to begin with, and so they're very interested in where we find remains. And so we have a joint effort with them to share information about where remains are recovered so they know where they might put water in the future. We're very interested in where remains are recovered because we may not get all the remains, especially if they're skeletal remains. So it's not uncommon that we wouldn't receive the whole body because the skeletal remains may have been spread out by animal activity and the weather, and so we may recover remains from a particular area, say in 2012, and then we discover additional skeletal remains are discovered in the same area in 2015, and what are the odds that it might be additional portions of somebody that was previously recovered. So we need to keep track of where remains have been found in the past so that we know when remains are found in the future if it's possible that it's additional portions of somebody we've already seen.
Is there new technology? Are there new pieces of equipment that you have today that perhaps you didn't have back in 2000, 2002 that are helping you do your job better and therefore identify more migrants?
Well, it's not really new technology that we've used over time. It's just more the processes and procedures that we have in place because we've examined so many of these types of remains that we've perhaps got a little better at it. But with the exception of maybe infrared photography, so that technology has been around, but when it was just film and not digital, it was more complicated than it is now.
Walk me around your morgue. What is it like in there? How is it organized? Tell me a little bit more about the morgue itself when it comes to migrants.
We have the examination area where the initial examination is done, and that we may or may not involve our anthropology staff depending on the condition of the remains. So if the remains are skeletal remains, then our anthropology staff will do an additional examination to determine basically if we can say how tall the person is and how long they've been in the desert or when they died, if it's a man or a woman, approximately how old they are, any ancestry characteristics, previous trauma, recent traumatic injuries to bone, all those kinds of things. We have a cooler where we store remains, and then we have areas where we hold property and other specimens.
So Nancy, what we have in here is our lockers of the various properties belonging to unidentified individuals thought to be border crossers, as well as property for the known individuals who are here in our facility currently.
Wow, and in this locker are people's lives.
What this is are basically a lot of the personal effects that people are carrying either on their person, in the clothing or backpacks that the individuals are carrying.
Can we see a couple of things?
Absolutely.
You're lucky here because it looks like you have an ID and a wallet. That's not always the case, is it?
That's not always the case, and you're right, and a little bit about that. Unfortunately, this is just a starting point because a lot of times what we find are these voter ID cards is what they are can be false identifications. So it's, typically it could be somebody who is found with this ID. However, this ID may have been purchased, may have been found out in the desert floor, or honestly could have been stolen at some point. So although this is great information, it's just a starting point for our office.
It's deceptive sometimes, isn't it?
Absolutely. Here's a second one that we've got that is a little bit better information in the sense that it's got a list of phone numbers that we can try. We have a weekly meeting in which various consulates and the United States Border Patrol attend, as well as our morgue supervisor. And one of the things that they'll do, kind of going through this personal effects, is that they'll go and contact, or at least try to contact, each of these phone numbers on this piece of paper.
It's a big puzzle, isn't it?
It is. It's quite the puzzle. I mean, we get a lot of different information that gives us a lot of good leads, and we try to track down as much of the pieces that we possibly can in order to kind of fit it all together.
I don't think people understand how much work and effort and even compassion goes into this office's attempts to find out who these people are.
Right, and I think that's a pretty valuable point to make, is that it takes a lot of compassion from a lot of different people. And again, it starts with our boss, Dr. Hess, who's always, again, as we kind of progress through this, to make it a people issue and not very much a political issue. And so, although it's a small portion of the kind of cases that we see annually, we do dedicate a lot of resources to it.
Do you have to keep a more of a investigator's mentality and not so much a personal, this is a human being mentality? Otherwise, it would be difficult to do your job, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think you have to have somewhat of a clinical approach to kind of solving these things, and really kind of taking a lot of, like you said, the pieces of the puzzle from what the anthropologist is telling us to what the pathologist is telling us and what the investigator can find and what Lindsay can glean from the consulates. I think you never really kind of lose sight of the fact that this is somebody's loved one. And I think that's kind of why everyone on our staff works pretty diligently to try to, identify these folks.
What's it like for you, Jean, when you find the family, when you've put the puzzle together and you find the family? What is that like for you?
Well, I think more often than not, it's the conversations that we have with the families until they're identified is excruciatingly painful. I mean, you hear it in their voice. They're completely lost. They don't know where to kind of go to help, or to get help rather. And they may have seen a news article or something like this that you're doing now on television that kind of gives them a hint to where their loved one might be. So when we finally get to the point where we're identifying them, and it's kind of bittersweet because, one, you've identified them. However, you've identified a decedent, a person who's deceased. So it's very difficult, I'm sure, for the families to kind of accept, because sometimes the remains that we find, it's not visibly kind of, something that the family can readily identify. So they have to essentially take our word that this is who we tell them it is, especially, when the remains are skeletonized or mummified. It's very difficult, but in the end, it's pretty satisfying to identify these folks and get them back home.
Those belongings are found on the bodies of deceased immigrants, or sometimes alone in the desert. From the federal government to volunteers, there are men and women committed to rescuing immigrants and, in some cases, recovering remains. Nancy Montoya takes us into some of Arizona's remote desert spots along the border. This stretch of desert near the Barry M. Goldwater Range is desolate, and in the summertime, the heat is unforgiving.
In the last 2 weeks, we've had 4 rescues, one requiring airlift to Phoenix Area Hospital and one medically treated on scene. And unfortunately, we found 5 deceased subjects in our area of responsibility.
John Atticusson is the Borstar commander in the Yuma sector. Agents patrol the desert on foot, on the ground, and by air. Rescue teams as small as 5 or as large as 60.
Our mission is to save lives. Plain and simply, we are trained. It's a collateral duty for us. We're all trained EMTs and paramedics, and trained in other specialty as well. And our job is to patrol the remote areas within our sector and save lives and assist those in need.
In 2001, 14 immigrants died crossing this part of Arizona's border. In response, Yuma agents installed about 20 rescue beacons. Once they depress a button on the beacon, a signal is sent to the radio dispatch at Yuma sector, depending on what sector it's located in. At that point, dispatch will put it out over the radio that we had activation of the beacon, and we'll respond accordingly. Over the years, it's made a difference, but the system is no match for the elements.
There's no shade, there's no protection out here from the sun whatsoever.
Temperatures spike in the summer. In 14 days, Borstar agents rescued 12 people, but could not save everyone.
These 4 subjects, I don't believe they had any cell phones on them. They didn't have any signaling devices. They had nothing. They had no means of contacting anyone for help. So unfortunately, one of our Borstar agents was out on a ride along with one of the Yuma helicopter pilots again, and they were checking an area known for smuggling activity, and they came upon 4 subjects that were found deceased, lying underneath another tree together.
A tragic day, and the effort to save ongoing.
You don't get used to finding deceased individuals in the desert, but we know we have a job to do. We definitely empathize with their journey, and we go out there and we train for these situations, so we're ready to respond at a moment's notice.
All right, let's load up.
Near Tumakakari, the mission to help is the same, but led by a different group of people. These are the Tucson Samaritans, volunteers, they say, just doing the right thing.
So we left this out here on 6/7. This wasn't used yet, but we have another that was not opened at 6/7, but I know we left more than 2. So some are gone, some are used. And then 6/23, they were just recently left out here.
Oh, the bird.
This is the Raven Hole. Good thing it's at the top, though. There's still water here.
Catherine Ferguson and Bob Key hiked the desert, leaving food and water for undocumented immigrants.
If you have an opportunity to meet these people, to talk to the people, and you discover who they are, like I always said, they're my heroes. They're incredible. What they go through, what they put themselves through knowingly.
An act of kindness, they say. This has become personal.
And I happened to glance over to my left, and maybe 100 feet or 120 feet away, I saw what was this white globe, and I knew at that point, I knew what it was. So the other people that were with me, I said, I believe that's a skull over there. I said, let's go check that out.
Human remains, devastating for Bob.
The first thing was it felt so surreal that, I knew that this occurred, seen photos and heard people talk about it, but when you actually have this experience, it was just a very surreal feeling. Sadness sets in, knowing that this is a human being.
For law enforcement and volunteers, it's an emotional effort. For the families of missing migrants, it's agony.
He called me Monday, the 20th, like around midday. He told me I'm about to cross the United States. I'll probably be there by your birthday. I hadn't seen him in 8 years, but he was decided and that he wanted to come. I just told him, well, be careful, I'll pray for you, and I was just hoping to see him soon. It was weird from him because it was like an out of nowhere thing, because he didn't really plan it out. He just decided to go like in the middle of the summer, it got to me like, oh, it's like this inspiration. He told me it was gonna be a 6-day walk, so I waited the 6 days, and from there I just started calling him and he wouldn't pick up.
This is Luis Jimenez, a 23-year-old dreamer, talking about his father, Jose Angel Jimenez Ortiz, a 46-year-old Mexican national.
He applied for a visa, but it was denied, and I believe he just got desperate. It's not like him. He would have called somebody.
His dad lived in the Mexican state of Chihuahua and paid a coyote $4,000 to get him to Phoenix. Luis does not want to call authorities.
What he is doing, it is illegal, If he was out there, fine, then I don't know, everything can go a different way. But now it isn't necessary. I didn't know exactly what to do. I didn't want to call law enforcement. And I also posted up a picture of him missing, and it's called Perdidos en la Frontera. It was a lot of people that were in Sonora that were missing. So I just posted up a picture looking for him with his details, see if I could get some help in that. And that was pretty much it till now.
For Luis, 4 weeks of silence is too long.
He left a lot of people worrying about him. I didn't want this to happen, what I'm going through right now. I still haven't lost faith. I still want to think he's okay, but I want to find out something about him. It's better than not knowing anything at all.
In Arizona, for years, foreign consulates, counties, and law enforcement agencies have worked together to identify missing migrants. In Tucson, the Colibri Center of Human Rights has built an international network to search for answers, hoping to give families closure.
¿Y cuál fecha es que salió de Honduras? Como el 27 de junio.
This is a typical day at the Colibri Center for Human Rights. Kat Rodriguez on the phone with a woman in Texas whose brother-in-law went missing when crossing the Arizona-Mexico border.
Sí, pero Tucson no está en la frontera. Tiene que
Out of this small space in the Pima County Office of the Medical Examiner, the Colibri Center tries to make connections.
We finally decided that the families of the missing really deserved a very clear, safe, centralized, and protected mechanism for them to report information about a missing loved one.
In Spanish, colibri means hummingbird.
For many Latino cultures throughout the Americas, the hummingbird is a symbol. It's kind of considered like a symbol of resilience and strength, but also a messenger between the living and the dead. And that's really what we strive to do at Colibri, is to act as a messenger and provide healing and much needed information.
Today's mission is about a 28-year-old first-time crosser.
He left Honduras and got to Caborca and then called the family, and that was the last they spoke to him was the 12th or 13th of July, which is it's typical. And then they haven't heard anything since then, and then now I guess a relative, somebody he was traveling with, was apprehended. So, but they don't know if that person knows him or not. The ID was on him. And then another relative he was traveling with arrived safely to his destination and hasn't told them anything. So they don't know, like for example, I asked like, what clothes was he wearing? And they don't know. So when we can't get clothing, we at least ask, do you know what size pants he wears? We try to get these things, the very basics, like, you know, we have his height. If this man who was found is significantly different in height, that would call into question that it's him.
Over the phone, the man's sister-in-law is as descriptive as possible.
¿Y cómo tiene el cabello? ¿Qué tan largo? ¿No tiene nada abnormal o deformado del cuerpo? You know, we'd ask people, can you email us a photo? Do you have any photos you can email? Do you have email? And it's very rare people would have email or internet, and they could have to go to a casa de internet, you know, in their community. And now we'll ask, like, do you have email? And people will say, no. Do you have face? ¿Tienes face? And we're like, yeah, we have Facebook. So Facebook has become a huge tool. And in the age of selfies, getting good facial photos happens really wonderfully from people's Facebook pages because, you know, people take a ton of selfies. What people tend not to do in selfies is smile and show their teeth.
Teeth are important because of dental records, anything to help identify a person.
Because the photo in here is very different. I think that's one of the reasons they also were hesitant, because she said that somebody from here told her that didn't look like him.
Travis Hairston is a medical legal death investigator for the Pima County Office of the Medical Examiner and working with Colibri.
If it's possible to print out a couple of those profile photos,
Sure.
I would present that to the doc, and maybe we can do a visual. I mean, because
Just this week, a young man died in the desert near Ajo. It's too early to tell if today's case is that man in the morgue.
Pima County is pretty rigorous in what they will stand behind in terms of identification. Like, they need to feel really good about it. And, you know, a good number of people who come in are not visually, like visually is not an option. Fingerprints are the next solid thing that could happen. The thing that sort of delays that, if in this case, this is his first time crossing the border, so we can't request prints of Border Patrol, which would be quick. So we have to go through the consulates, which can take a couple weeks because they have to request it from the home country.
And if they can make the connection.
If I were to call someone, I would first let the consulate know, hey, we're going to let this family know, and we're going to let them know to call you next, because that's, if the family wants to send him back to Honduras or send someone back to Mexico or wherever they're from, that's got to be done through the consulates. If they want him to, if they want him here in the U.S. because all the relatives are here, that may not require consular involvement, but we do, as a rule, let the consulate know that they're aware of, one of their paisanos is, what has been found and identified.
The Colibri Center recently launched what it's calling the DNA Project. For the next 3 years, traveling to major cities in the U.S., collecting DNA.
We're going to be able to collect DNA from the families of the missing and send those DNA samples from the families to the same lab where the Pima County Office of the Medical Examiner has sent DNA for unidentified remains for more than a decade.
There are about 900 unidentified remains in Pima County's database. Current funding will finance about 2,500 tests.
The power of DNA, we're hoping will finally be able to connect the dots between many of those relatives and those mortal remains.
Inside this binder, information of the unidentified remains.
All that was found of that person was this. So when you have someone like that and doesn't even have the facial part, potentially has 2 more ribs, the only hope for us to know who this person is DNA. There's some of them that I'll do a search in our database and I can narrow it down to 173 possibilities. You can't go through all of those, but DNA can.
63 o 68?
As for the woman on the phone, her hope is in Tucson at the Colibri Center.
No, it doesn't get any easier. I mean, the words come to you like trying to say, but, what can you possibly say to someone who, you're potentially looking at their loved one, in photos in the morgue? I mean, what could you possibly say? And so, I just feel like if we can do as much as we can to make sure they understand and get the information that we can from them, that's the best service that we can provide them, because, I have no words to give them that would make that okay, that would make a 28-year-old man, dying in the desert okay.
And that's our program. Thanks for joining us. Next week, Arizona Week explores arguments for and against raising the state's minimum wage. For all of us at Arizona Public Media, I'm Lorraine Rivera. Thanks for joining us.